All right, now that we started that, we left off yesterday talking about the Teledyne Continental motors, or the Continental system. And so we had talked about this yesterday. The Continental system uses 3 controllers. Remember, each controller is independent and has its own job, but at the same time, if we follow this crazy loop around here, it does get a little interesting. So before, everything was in parallel. And in parallel, each thing could override the other. So they could both block, but if one opens, open is open. If the other one opens, open is open. Both opens are both open, both closed, both closed. Let's see if this does the same thing here. So, let's see, oil return to engine, we got to have, no, this is going through here, right? That's got to be a connection. So oil's coming in, it's doing the exact same thing. Filling up, if we were to block that, it's going to open it, wastegate goes open. And it's going to come through here. So this goes down, this comes this way, it goes that way, and that goes that way. So are we in series or parallel? Okay, let me see if we can do this a different way so you can see it. If it's in parallel, that means you'd have to have 2 open to get a flow. So, sorry, series. So if it's in parallel, each one is independent. So let's see. So we've got, so this will come through here. It can go through A and return to engine. We come up through here.
That shows it.
This goes through C and out. And see if we can get an independent. That has its own independent. So each one has its own independent route.
Why did the arrow show flow going backwards from the direction you're going?
It doesn't. Oh.
It goes backwards.
Maybe the way I just drew it.
So it's showing everything is.
Well, pressure is pressure.
It's either. Go either way.
Yeah, I can go either way. So 1, 2, 3. You can look at it that way, I guess. I was just trying to do it a different way. But so they're in series or in parallel. Are they independent or not independent? They're independent, so I make them parallel. So each one can override the next one, which was the point there. All right, so we'll go to this. All right, the Continental system. All right. The typical system, typical Continental, because you can always get a variation of this. We have an absolute pressure controller. And I did have a note that I found somewhere that most unpressurized systems use a cam. So cam, that's the only note I wrote. So I'm just going to think at one point I noticed that you had a throttled cam that would go just like we saw in Lycoming, that would adjust that absolute pressure controller, kind of like it would be the one we looked at, the variable pressure controller. Thank you. 2, we have a rate of change. Controller. And 3, we have the pressure ratio controller. So this is like one. Should put there uses 3 different controllers. Number 2. All controllers are vented to or sense upper deck pressure. Just going to go back to this real quick. All of them sense upper deck pressure. So this is upper deck pressure up here. You can see every single one of them is connected to upper deck pressure. All controllers operate to restrict or bleed oil, just like Lycoming. Oil, I'll say from wastegate, like the Lycoming. So nothing different there. But looking at each one independently, we'll start with the absolute pressure controller. Absolute pressure controller. That is designed to limit the maximum upper deck pressure.
So if it goes above the specified amount, it'll open up and release.
That is it.
Okay.
So absolute. So it's going to set your your top end to that.
Like the density.
Like the density. So you got it. So just like the density, we'll see. We'll put the design to limit. To limit maximum upper deck pressure. And number 2, at a set limit, it will bleed off oil. Right? Open up, bleed off oil, let the wastegate start to go towards open. Turbo off. Can I move over?
Okay.
Number 2. Rate of change controller. Actually, it's not number 2. It's the second one, but it's point number 5. Rate of change controller. It senses the rate at which upper deck pressure increases. The rate at which upper deck pressure, UDP, we'll get it down there, UDP increases. If the rate is too fast, if rate is too fast, controller opens. Bleeding off oil, allowing the wastegate to start to open, causing the turbo to slow down. Somewhere around here I had the actual number of what the rate was, and I don't know where I did with it. But, okay. Next one, the pressure ratio controller. Which sounds a lot like differential pressure controller. So at higher altitudes, let me see. The difference between this one, though, and the Lycoming version is where it's sensing it. So notice that there is no reference to manifold pressure. So it's strictly going to sense ambient. So it's now, instead of the difference between manifold and upper deck, it's upper deck and ambient temperature. So it's going to be just a slight difference there. Let's see, at higher altitudes, the turbo obviously has to work hard. Must work hard to keep, work hard to keep upper deck pressure at maximum. So, actually what I wrote, at higher altitudes, turbo must work hard to keep the manifold pressure set, it should be upper deck pressure, set for max horsepower. So at maximum, I'll put horsepower. So if you think about it, you think, well, the controller's job is, the absolute pressure controller's job is there, and you see we have an absolute pressure controller, and it wants to see what in the upper deck?
Pressure.
Pressure, how much?
Whatever.
All of it,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so the first one I talked about, the absolute pressure controller. So its job, you can see, designed to limit maximum upper deck pressure. So if we said, all right, we want, even if it's just, say, a normalizer, we want it at 30 inches. All right, so we get up to this high altitude, and the absolute pressure controller, it wants to see 30 inches. So it's telling the turbo, you got to keep going, man. You got to keep going. And at some point, we're going to get to an altitude where that turbo is just screaming. If it has the capability, it's going to keep packing air in, but the air is going to start getting really hot. So now we're going to start getting our air too hot, and we're going to start having some problems. So we don't want that. But how are you going to program in the absolute to take care of this? Well, you don't. We'll put in the pressure ratio controller, just like Lycoming did with their absolute and then their differential controller. But this time we're not looking at the same differences. We're just looking at the difference between atmospheric and this controller. So it's another way to say, hey, pay attention to where we are in the altitude, which you didn't get before. So, but at some point, yeah, the air will become too hot, cause destination, ratio controller keeps that. So at some point, air is too hot from the compression and cause detonation or pre-ignition. Pre-ignition or detonation. And this pressure ratio controller keeps this from happening. So the pressure ratio controller, the PRC, keeps this from happening. And how does it do that? Well, it is going to monitor the ratio between upper deck and ambient. So monitors ratio between, or difference, between upper deck pressure and ambient, and limits it to 2.2 times ambient. Which, kind of think it through a little bit. If we just did 2 times for simple math. So if we're on the ground, 30 inches. So this controller will allow it to go up to 60. Will it go to 60? No, because
The absolute pressure control.
absolute pressure controller says, no, you don't. Well, this one's, yeah, but I want to go more. The absolute pressure controller opens, says, you're not going to do that. So we start going up in altitude, and we're going to get to some point where I don't have the math in my head for that one. We're gonna get to some point where this one right here is gonna say, all right, we're at the limit now. We're kind of at 2.2. We're getting there. It's been closed the whole time. Got to 2.2, and over here the absolute's gonna be like this one is closed and that one's closed. They're both gonna be happy for just a brief second, and we keep going up. Now the absolute is gonna be closed, saying, well, wait a minute, I need more. And this one's going to say, yeah, but you can't, because now we're 2.2 times what we had before. So we got to stop that nonsense, because things are just going to get a little out of control. So that's the way that works. Let's see. And that's kind of it for those. Let's see, operation, but I think this is really just redundant. Engine's off. Hop in the airplane, or you're the mechanic, and you pull the cowling, and you look at the wastegate. What position is it going to be in? Open, normally open, which says turbo on or off.
On.
Good thing, because it's off anyway. All right, start up the engine. Oil pressure builds up. What's going to happen?
Start flowing into the wastegate.
Starts flowing into the wastegate. Is it going to then, again, it goes to the controllers, any of them really. Are the controllers going to typically be blocking or draining?
Blocking.
They're all going to be blocking because we're down at idle. So not a single one of them is going, well, that's too much. I was just going to make fun of Nick, but maybe I won't tonight.
Go ahead, I can take it.
Got a controller over here like Nick. As soon as we get to 11 PSI, starts screaming, stop!
We were doing the engine.
We were pressure oiling his engine. And yeah, you were motoring it through, and I was on the back side. I didn't really tell him what to do. I just wanted to see what happened, because that's fun for me. And then
It got up to it just changed.
it went 0, 1.1, 1.1, stop!
I was like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know.
So it's like, I don't know. You didn't tell me what to do.
Yeah. No worries.
So then he told him to go. They didn't tell him to stop. And he had a little heart attack. Like, you can tell him to stop now. It's been going forever. Anyway, so the controller's going to say, let's go ahead and close, spool up. All right, so wastegate closes, spools up the turbo. Upper deck starts increasing. And remember, we're idle. So we got the manifold closed, throttle closed. So upper deck pressure starts increasing. If we're in the Lycoming variable, I don't know what we'll do. There we go, now with the names in front of us. If we have the differential pressure, it's going to sense the difference between
Upper deck and manifold.
upper deck and manifold. I just switched over to Lycoming real quick, because
I was like, hold
it just
on.
came into my mind. I said, if we have like that system, or we can stick with Continental, and I could just say, well, upper deck pressure manifold increase until, okay, we'll stick with one. I'm sorry, he's right. We'll go back. We'll stick with one. We'll stick with this. All right, so we've started it up, we're running it, and we're idling it. So manifold pressure is going to start increasing until which one says no, you don't? And the words are right there if you can see them.
Absolutely.
I don't think not so much. My opinion.
Absolutely.
I think absolute. Yeah, absolute would if it can, at idle. Yeah, I think that'd be the first one. Perhaps, let's just say, if you had a pretty fast idle going on there and the thing started to spool up and come up too fast, then it would definitely be
Absolutely.
the rate of change. Okay, then eventually it's going to be the absolute. And the rate of change isn't really going to, I would say, have an effect unless you're actually moving the throttle forward. So let's just say then we line up on the runway, we're ready to take off, and we smash the throttles forward to go. Then
Rate of change.
I think the rate of change will be the first one to pop off. I'm going to slow down here a little bit there, Tiger. And then as that one kind of settles down, and then as we start our climb, we hit max power. That one's okay, we're not changing anymore. Full power. Then the absolute's going to kind of take over, keep that because we're wide open throttle. And it's going to stay that way until we get to a certain altitude. And we keep climbing. Then eventually that one is going to start dropping out as the pressure ratio controller is going to start taking over. Let me see. My notes say about 16,000 feet.
Is rate of change controller specifically put in there for like that, like safety of overboosting?
I believe so, yeah. Yeah, overshooting, overboosting. Let me see. Let's see. All right. So one thing, I wish I had a picture, but I don't. But this is an interesting point here. So if the fuel injection system, because this is going to be a continental system, uses a variable orifice, fuel pump. Do you remember what this is by chance?
PR, no, that's pressure.
Okay, so we're going back to the fuel injection system from last week. And some of you are like, damn, that was last week. How am I supposed to remember this? So if we remember the fuel injection pump from last week for Continental, didn't sense air,
Nope, since fuel.
sense fuel. But the fuel pump had two controls, two settings, the
High and low.
high and low. Okay, so the high end, we could actually put an aneroid on there and make it a movable orifice. Sure, it's adjustable, but you get it adjusted to, and you have to have a chart that'll tell you, if you're at this altitude and this temperature, adjust it for this fuel flow. But then from there, it's going to be sensing upper deck pressure. So what would happen is, if upper deck pressure is really high, manifold pressure, that would make more sense. If manifold pressure is really high, then do we want more or less fuel? Want more. A lot of air, we need more fuel. Okay, to get more fuel out of the TCM system, we go back to the main metering orifice, the high end adjustment, that's a better term, the high end adjustment on the pump. If that is screwed in tight, we make the orifice tiny, do we get more fuel to the engine or less fuel?
More.
Get more. So when manifold pressure is up, we're going to want that orifice to, you should be able to collapse. And so when it collapses, the needle is going to cause the orifice to get much smaller, causing more fuel to go out to the engine. So what would happen is, if you follow the whole thing through, in the Continental system with turbo lag, throttle forward, manifold opens, RPM increases, the pump should start giving more fuel just because the RPM increased. But we haven't built up our manifold pressure yet. It's coming in a little bit. So we can't adjust the fuel pump to give us, if we adjusted the fuel pump correctly and didn't have the bellows on it, right then and there we go over rich. Follow? Because we throttle forward, RPM increased, this senses RPM, you want more fuel, boom, you got it. Meanwhile, the turbo's going, wait, what's happening over here? Right? It's got a cigarette, it's on a break. Oh, I guess we got to spool up over here. Well, too bad for you, you're too rich now. Now belt smoke coming out. So by tying in the manifold pressure to this aneroid, mash the throttle forward, the orifice is still kind of large. And so the pump's going to recirculate more. So not quite as much is going to go to the engine as would normally. Now the turbo starts spooling up, upper deck pressure increases, manifold pressure increases. This senses manifold, and as that pressure increases, collapses the bellows, making the orifice smaller, which causes more fuel, less fuel to recirculate, more fuel to the engine. Follow? Okay.
How does that bellows sit inside of?
I think I have one system over there
Is it,
that
like,
actually
in
has.
line?
Yeah, it's in
So
line.
it's in line.
Uh huh.
Okay.
Right, and it actually, you pull that orifice out. It's going to go with that orifice, and then there's a bellows there with an adjustment screw to move the bellows in and out for manual adjustment, and then the bellows does its thing. Yeah, I thought I had a picture. I guess I don't. It's just in my mind. Let's see. Variable orifice. Yeah, low. Okay, fuel pump. So low manifold pressure. So if we're still low manifold pressure, will reduce fuel flow during acceleration until turbo spools up. And manifold pressure increases. And this prevents an overly rich mixture. This prevents an overly rich mix due to turbo lag. I had a cat named Turbo. Thing was wild. My wife brought it home. Climbed the walls.
Every time you try to pet it, it like run away or what?
No, I just climbed the walls and all kinds of crazy shit. Yeah. All right, let's see. C. Other TCM systems. Because we can't have just one, that would be just too easy. We have the variable absolute controller. You ever get the feeling that turbo systems were designed by a committee? It's like this committee's in charge of that, this committee's in charge of that, and they all kind of get together. Well, they eventually got rid of the committee. Oops, that's I. This be 1. This combines all 3 controllers into one unit. That way, if one part goes bad, they all go bad, and you have to buy one controller. This uses a cam operated by the throttle. By throttle to vary spring pressure. Which I think then takes care of the ratio issue right there. Like Lycoming would. Yeah. Lycoming variable controller. And this one is usually used with an overboost relief valve. And that's that spring-loaded poppet. Spring-loaded poppet that vents upper deck pressure. That vents upper deck pressure if it is too high. If it is too high. And one other one, in keeping with the tradition of slope controllers, which once again does not provide a whole lot of information. And it's kind of a quick one. So this one references upper deck, and manifold. What does that sound like? Yep. To maintain upper deck, yes. So that one is the pressure ratio controller. References upper deck pressure and manifold pressure to maintain a preset pressure differential across throttle plate. And there. That is all of our controllers.
Sounds like slope control. They're just like, yeah, they do the same thing.
That, it pretty much, yes. Review. There we go. We have the density pressure controller. Senses upper deck and prevents overboost at full throttle, which sounds a lot like the absolute pressure controller for Continental. So over here I have Lycoming, Continental. Differential pressure keeps pressure across the throttle plate correct, if you will. I didn't have a lot of room. So references, upper deck and manifold, and the variable pressure combination density differential, measuring upper deck, manifold, and throttle linkage with the cam and the spring. Slope control, stop that. Slope control is a combo density differential. We have the absolute pressure controller, senses upper deck and prevents overboost at full throttle. The rate of change senses a rate of upper deck pressure increases. And the pressure ratio, which keeps the pressure ratio of upper deck from an ambient from getting too high. Just remember all that.
Yeah, shit.
All right, intercoolers. Used on both Lycoming and Continental. Cools the air after it leaves the compressor going into upper deck. Because what we have is very hot air, which loses its density. If we can cool the air back down, then we get some of that density back. But there's a problem with it. And the problem is
There's too much air coming in.
restrictions. You got to run it through restrictions. So this is a pretty tight little area that it has to run through. And I took this picture because of these fins right here are all bent over and nasty. That is typically mechanic damage. Anybody ever pressure wash your grill on your car? You usually don't make that mistake twice.
Imagine with the air conditioners outside the window ACs.
Yeah.
You push the vents in the back.
Yeah. So yeah, I have a radiator comb. I'd go in and fix them all and stuff. So anyway, so the area of damage to left intercooler found. STD rocker box cover screws loosen this area. I don't know what that's talking about. But anyway, you got to watch out for that. So that's part of your maintenance. When you see that right there, I've actually just spent some time with a little tiny screwdriver and just kind of straightened them all out for people. You get a couple of them.
And then air goes over
So-
the top and
Yeah, let's go back to beginning. Not that. There you go. So like that. So the cowling is going to have ambient air, if you will, coming through, across, down, and overboard. The heat exchanger. And then, of course, your pressurized air is going to come up through this way, the hot air, through here, and off into here.
so the ambient air is definitely cooler than the
So it's a radiator.
yeah.
It's an air radiator.
What kind of temperature drop can you expect?
I don't actually know. Well, it's going to obviously depend on the ambient air, right?
Okay.
Do they ever,
Hot day, cool day.
do they ever duct, air conditioned air?
No, I don't think so, because air conditioning systems on light piston aircraft. Oh, help yourself. So.
Don't be shy.
Air conditioning systems on light aircraft. I want to say I just don't feel like they're not as robust as cars. They don't work quite as well because they create drag. They heat up the engine. You got to run the compressor.
There's no free lunch.
There's no free, and a lot of them are electric driven too. I've worked on some airplanes where the actual compressor was in the baggage compartment running off an electric motor. And so the idea was you run it on the ground, but as soon as you take off, you got to shut that thing off, which makes sense because, you know, you don't have an air conditioner. I don't have an air conditioner. It's,
I do.
yeah.
Sliding canopy.
You got to, yeah, I've got the vents right here. Psh. Which I have a funny story about that one. But,
Bottle.
It's free bottle and a bucket of ice.
yeah, you only need it on the ground. Once you take off, you should be shut.
120 knots.
Yeah.
You swear that out in front of you?
I have learned not to do that when you have papers out on the seat. You can actually slide that back in flight. You can do it like 12, 14 inches with the, if you button down, it goes.
It's out, yeah.
All right, so we have the intercoolers. And that just cools the air, after it leaves compressor. All right, talk about some maintenance. Sometimes I think we spend way too much time on theory, not enough on how to actually maintain this stuff. But the whole point behind theory is you have to troubleshoot it and understand it. And if you don't understand it, it's like, well, it's a turbo. I don't know what it does. It's kind of hard to work on them. All right, maintenance. We use mouse milk. Mouse milk on wastegate. Wastegate to dissolve Coke. Do not, and all manufacturers are very, very adamant about this one, do not adjust controllers without exact instructions and equipment. It gets very, very detailed on what they want you to do and how to do it.
Kevin, what is mouse milk? You use it as a penetrating lubricant, but you say it dissolves the Coke?
Well, they say it dissolves Coke. And I don't know if that does that so much, because I mean, where are you getting the Coke from, really? But I put it on all the little moving parts, and it kind of dissolves whatever is there and sorts to help it move much freer.
Say we're North Highlands, it's not hard to find.
Yeah, you get rat milk too. Your mouse
I thought you were
milk,
talking
rat
about
milk.
the Coke. I was talking about Coke.
Oh, talking about Coke.
Lordy, lordy.
I don't know. You reminded me it's 4:20 today, so.
Oh, Lord.
He didn't. I said something to him. He goes, I don't know what that is. Apparently, it's Hitler's birthday.
It's also my cousin's birthday.
What's your cousin's name? It's not Adolf, is it?
He's like,
It is. He's really old. He's got this stupid
It's a
mustache.
Jolfo.
Wait, that's not racist, is it?
No, it's just
Then it's not
funny.
funny. All right, back to this while I still have a job. So,
Kevin, it makes you feel easier. I'd say more than half of your videos have some point in it, like, don't worry, I'll edit that out. There you go, say that.
I'll edit that out. Nobody will ever know. I don't spend time to edit this stuff, obviously. Keep induction clamps tight. Yeah, there's just worm drive clamps. God's sakes. So, although funny thing, and I never thought about this, they had mentioned this in Rotax school, because Rotax don't have worm drive clamps, because they're water cooled. And so the water hoses, your car, well, you notice your new cars, they just have those spring clamps where you just, with a plier, and you're like, cheap crap. And so, throw those out and you go get a nice worm drive clamp and really tighten on there. Rotax said, no. Those are worse. The spring clamps are way better. You have expansion and contraction. If you have a worm drive clamp, it doesn't expand and contract. It just cracks and breaks. So you put the spring-loaded clamp, which actually will move with whatever is. They said, don't ever change those out. Anyway, we want to keep all of our induction clamps tight. We have lots of them. Let's see. I don't want this. Lots of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and that's just one side. So, 28 of these stupid little things.
That's the ones you can see.
I was pretty able to. I can count them all. 2, 4, 6, 8.
Where do those pipes lead down to?
This right down here is a bolted joint.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so at least 28 of those. There's actually a torque on them. And believe it or not, see that it's not a hex on a lot of them. So it's like, well, how do you torque those? There's a particular 6-point socket that'll fit right over those anyway.
Mac actually makes a socket that's got a groove cut that fits over perfectly.
Snap-on has a 6-point socket that fits over perfectly.
I wonder which one's cheaper.
Yeah. So, oh,
Keep them tight.
look, they're not even the same. Over there, they got the, hex nut type. Okay. All right, so we want to keep those clamps tight. Look for leaks. Look for air leaks. What's an indication of an air leak? Induction leak. An indication. You're a mechanic. Yes, it would run lean if you have an air leak, for sure. Well, okay, let's take that one, because since it made me think about it. What would be an indication of an air leak? Oh, what are you going to say?
EGT rise.
Oh, man, we could have an EGT off on one cylinder. We've got, you said run lean, which we'd notice at, right, idle cutoff. Yeah, idle cutoff. You're not, hey, it used to be 50 RPM rise. Now I got nothing. What are we going to do? Oh, we'll just back the screw out a little bit. Well, wait a minute. What happened? Why did it suddenly not work anymore? You keep backing the screw out, Hey, the screw came out. Could be an air leak.
It's still leaking.
Still leaking. This is leaking worse. Okay, but this fuel injection, so it would work different. I did have on here, I still have it, blue fuel stains. Why would we not get blue fuel stains on this system?
Yeah, it's fuel injections.
Because it's fuel injection, and how much fuel is right here? None, and none, and none, and none, and none, and none, and none, all the way down to here. Where's the fuel?
Right there.
Sprayed into the head, right? Actually, right. No, that's the drain back tube. So sprayed in over here. That's a good point. These do have drains on the bottom of some aircraft. So that'd be a drain right there. So if you overprime it, it's got a place for the fuel to go. That usually then means that there's a sniffle valve. Maybe it's a snuffle valve, I think. But a sniffle valve is a little ball check valve. So when the aircraft is off, the ball falls down and it creates a passage where fuel can leak out. And when you start the aircraft, the ball gets sucked up into a seat and there's no more air leak. So you got to watch those. Usually leaf rollers get in there and make it so that it's closed. But occasionally you can have them open, which would be an air leak, which would show up with no idle RPM rise.
Would you want a two-way valve for when you're operating under pressure? You're at altitude, or if that's at,
Oh yeah, if you're pressurizing, it'll go the other way around. I think it didn't have a spring in it.
yeah.
Well, they have a spring, then it wouldn't fall open. I've had some where people said, "Oh no, it's a calibrated leak." I'm like, "Are you sure about that?" Okay. Let's see. Check for the check intercooler fins. Checking for damage, blockages. Check, I wrote rotables here, but I don't want to use that word. So check the turbo/compressor for free turning. No rubbing. And we'll check. We will check the compressor for FOD damage. Or FOD. Depending on what the D stands for. What does FOD stand for? Foreign object debris damage. But if the D stood for damage, then it's foreign object damage. Looks like what?
CAC card.
Tac card.
CAC card.
Common access
CAC.
card.
Common access card.
Oh,
When the military ID card changed from the old standard green card to now the CAC card, everybody started calling it the CAC card, but it's really just saying common access card.
which would be like La Brea tar pits. Well, who speaks Spanish? La Brea. What does that mean? The tar? Or it's like the tar pits, something like that. The Los Angeles Angels.
The Angels.
The Angels.
They did it to themselves.
You need money.
They did it to themselves.
So I went to the automatic ATM machine.
Exactly.
All right, that is really digressing. Okay, how are we doing on time? Oh, it's break time. See, I'm not aware of time.